Mic check.
I can hear you.
I can't hear you.
You can?
I'm just joking.
Okay. I was like, can you just see my lips move and that's it?
How you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Good.
Close my door. I need to start taking these Zoom meetings for HOA somewhere else because I'm in this office all day with work, so it makes me feel like I'm not leaving work.
You never leave.
Um, real quick, this is not a full monthly. This is just to go over the few things that were listed on the agenda, right?
Correct.
Okay. Uh, so it's just so I copied what I did was I copied a meeting minutes from, I guess, earlier this year and then made it just a template. So
Okay.
I'll just have to edit this one because it's not a full meeting, so it won't have the full scope of everything.
Okay.
Can you guys hear me? It's Kevin.
Yep, it's very low though.
Sorry, I'm in my car in traffic.
No problem. Who was not making it today?
I think
Was it
April was
April?
April and I think Jason.
So we just need Mark, and then there's four of us, right?
Um, Mark or Mac.
So they still have a few more minutes before it's
Yeah,
six.
yeah. I'm
Yeah.
just preparing who's not so I can list it on the notes. But just the FYI, this morning, my initiative for this whole getting with getting some evidence for the county this morning. A dad and two boys walking to Stowers about 7:04 this morning were nearly hit by a BMW
Oh,
going from Village Center towards um, Boyette down that strip. So the roundabout that it connects literally screeched the tires and stopped within probably about 3 feet of the family.
There was a Hillsborough County Sheriff down by the Oaks, where the little pull-off is for whatever that area is. There's like a driveway, and there's some, I guess it's electrical equipment or something in behind a fence. But he was sitting in there earlier, probably around 10 to 8. Catching, looking at on Village Center by between Watercolor and the Oaks.
Yeah, it's earlier for me is when a lot of that stuff happens. I mean, I'm not saying it stops at a specific time, but it's more heavy during the hours of dropping off the elementary folks
Yeah,
or people
I'm just
just
saying
zooming
that's
through.
when I saw the cop. He might have been there earlier. I don't know. That's when I saw him.
Yeah, that was further down the street. It'd have been nice to have it a little bit earlier, but anyways, I'm gonna contact the the deputy I spoke with. I've got an email trail from last year. I'm gonna reconnect with him.
Mm-hmm.
It was he's for our district, so Corporal Parsons.
Yeah, I don't know what they do to fix for that. I mean, if it's in a roundabout, that's just somebody not paying attention.
Oh yeah, but he was floating pretty quick.
Yeah,
And then the person behind him nearly rear-ended him.
of course.
Yep.
Well, and there was an accident, I think, by Bell Creek Academy because everything was jacked up trying to get out of the subdivision this morning. Like it was backed up all the way to Mosaic. So Circuit Fishhawk was backed up all the way to Mosaic, and Boyette was backed up all the way to the Sowers, that roundabout right there. So,
Nice. Hey, Mark.
Hey, what's going on, John?
Let's go.
Wait.
hi, Mark.
Is that Kevin?
That is, I'm in the car, so there's no video, just audio for me.
No, gotcha, no problem. It just gives a phone number, doesn't give you a name, so I just wanted to make sure.
Here, who else?
that's me.
Mark wasn't coming. Is it just April? Or was Jason not able to make it?
I don't think either one of them is able to make it. Jason's in Sydney, and I forget what April's doing. I think she's on an airplane.
Okay, I'm just making notes.
So there's Rebecca.
Hello, everyone.
And I don't think Mac will be joining us either. Patty, have you heard from Mac at all?
No. I'm gonna shoot him a text though. I do believe
Okay.
he's coming.
We can give a couple minutes before we kick off. Patty, if you want to reach out to Mac, see if he's going to join or not.
Yes, I'll do that right now.
Oh gosh, otherwise it's just three of us, huh?
Kevin's on
Kevin's
too.
on.
Oh,
So we-
I see Kevin now. Okay, sorry.
We do have quorum. We could pass votes if we need to. We're just waiting to see if we can get quorum plus.
I like that quorum plus.
The more the merrier.
Exactly.
Did he reply,
Mhm.
Patty?
Not yet.
Okay. All right, well, it's 6:02. We're going to go ahead and go call to order at 6:02. We do have a quorum. Myself, Kevin Schmidt is on, Rebecca's on, John Lovingood's on. We also have the property manager and Jennifer as well. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We have two items on the agenda this evening. This is really just a continuation meeting from last Thursday's to talk about two items that we tabled for a week to give the treasurer some time to do some research. Two items are, one, we're going to talk about the AC, the air conditioner at the lake house, and the other one is a reserves discussion that'll be led by Rebecca. So without any further ado, are there any other officer comments before we begin? Rebecca, do you have anything to pass that's not related to the two items that are on the agenda that you want to get out there ahead of time?
No, I think not for tonight. I think we covered everything last week. Every other topic that I needed to cover. So
All right. I do have one president's thing that I want to talk about. I went down to the pool with John Lovingood. We were down there, and there's some grates that go around the pool, some drainage grates, and it's very dangerous. While we were there, a little girl got her foot caught in one and cut her ankle up, and she was hurt. If I send you the pictures, they look like traps. So I wanted to order new drains. It's not much. It's about $900. We won't need all of them, but that's to make sure that we can cover all of them. And then whatever we don't need, we can mail back. So I'd like to motion to approve $900 to buy drainage grates to cover the drains around the pool. I think that this is an important item. It's definitely a safety issue, especially with Easter coming up this weekend. It needs to be done before that.
yeah, I agree.
I'll second.
What was the cost, Mark? Sorry, 'cause I'm taking notes.
About $900. Patty, is that about right?
Yes, that's about right.
Okay, great.
I think they're $14.99 each.
Okay. All right. So
And then we're gonna do us replace them, or are we having someone else?
Well, I have me, Kevin, and another volunteer are standing by to go down and put them in, or I talked to Patty today. We can have the maintenance guy also do it. Whatever's fastest and gets it done before the weekend.
All right, I second.
Yeah, I agree.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. None opposed. Motion carries. All right. That's all I had as president. Rebecca, over to you.
Okay, so last week we discussed that Patty had raised that there's an issue with the HVAC system at the lake house. There's actually two separate units. We received the estimate for it, which was a little over $20,000. And the ask for this meeting was to do do some analysis, do some estimates on if we have the money for it. So I'm going to share my screen. Oh, Patty, it says the screen sharing is disabled. Can you turn it on?
Jen? Yes. Jen, you got that? We can't hear you, Jen.
Well, Jen's working on seeing if she can get the screen to share enabled. So one of the reasons I had to do some analysis is because this was not planned it is a reserve item. It was not planned for this year. It is planned for next year. So there is money that is, being allocated towards this, but it wouldn't be fully funded until 2025. So I did some analysis on the actual reserve study to see what was planned for 2023, what's planned for 2024, what's planned for 2025, and looking at the actual balance in the reserve account. The way we have the reserve account structured today, we do have separate separate accounts for what is considered general, and this would fall. There's general, the pool, roofing, painting, pavement, and retaining walls, and so this HVAC would fall under the general, sort of the general bucket, if you will.
Hey, Rebecca,
So-
I'm sorry to interrupt 1 second. Hey, Kevin, could you mute your mic, please?
Rebecca, are you able to screen share now?
Let me try. Looks like it. So can you see my, I don't know, can you guys see yourselves? I don't know if that.
Yes, we can see it. I can see a screen share.
Okay. Okay, so just to orient you here, so these are the reserve components. So this is the current balance. This is what we fund monthly. This is what we should have remaining in the, to fund for the balance of this year. And then we have the expected 2024 ending balances. So this is not considering the expenses that I've listed on this side over here. So Patty, one of the things I was trying to find out if we actually did replace these items in 2023. I could not find an actual invoice that showed that we replaced those. So I wanted to just double check. I don't know if anybody here can answer that question, but I could not find where anything was charged to the reserves or even an expense related to these items. So I'll just pause and ask that question.
I know that fitness center carpeting was replaced. We removed the carpet and we
Okay.
replaced the flooring in there.
Okay.
Don't know
other-
about any of the
yeah.
well pumps. Patty?
The only well pump that we had any worked on was the Sagewood pump. None of the others.
Okay, and this is in the master, so that would be separate. So the reason I was trying to break it out this way is because we didn't have the money in the account, but what we did have planned for this year was the gym equipment. We actually spent it last year, but we planned to have it cost 81,000 and change. We actually only spent 30,000 and change. So given that, I think that we would have the money available in the reserves for this year. We do currently only have 25,867 in the account. So that's just something that, I mean, we have enough to cover it, but it's going to take us down to a pretty low amount, and we'll continue to fund that every month. But I wanted to at least highlight that we do have the money to fund it. And because that money was planned for this year, we already spent what we were going to spend for it. So we're not going to spend the other $50,000. I think that covers the expense that we need. And then next year, we had also planned in the reserve study to fund the fitness center HVAC, which we pay for in February of this year. It broke, so we had to pay for it in February of this year. We had planned for 19,000 and we spent, a little under 13,000. So those two things will not have to be funded next year. And so this amount would get, we would continue to replace the funding for that for next year, if that makes sense. So the recommendation here is that we have the money available to us. The HVAC is broken, or it's on the verge of, completely breaking. And before it becomes a safety issue, we want to get it replaced. So my motion here is to go ahead and spend the money now, use the 20-year, oh gosh, I don't have it in front of me, and I only have one screen on here, Patty, but it was a 10-year, it was, I think it was the York. I don't remember. There were two brands, and I don't remember which one it was.
Yeah, so it's option A, York commercial.
Yeah, I think it was the York, and that had, and Kevin, I believe that was the one that you were recommending in the discussion last week, which had the 10-year warranty. And
That's correct. That's the one I recommended.
so the motion here is to go ahead and replace the HVAC unit in the lake house, both units, I should say, which is a reserve item that was planned for next year. So, and we do have a current available balance that we can use to pay for that.
I would second the motion, opening us up for discussion and any questions.
I mean, for me and myself, I don't feel like rehashing it because we did quite a bit of chat about it last meeting. So I just want to make sure I have what's to be documented today about it. So all I'm stating is that, redoing from last week that was discussed, and then your analysis, Rebecca, is that this was initially not planned for this year, but however, there is sufficient amount of funds in the general bucket as of today for the 25,000+. And then the recommendation is to move forward with that, with proceeding with the new replacement. Is that correct?
That's correct.
In the amount of $21,659.
Correct.
And John, can you make the minutes show that Mac joined the meeting as well, please?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I missed the Zoom only, and I actually didn't go to Europe, and so I'm in Florida, and I went to the lake house and realized it must be a Zoom. So I apologize for being late.
Oh, so sorry for that miscommunication, Mac.
No worries.
Glad you're here, Mac. I guess so. Do we have a vote? So all in favor?
So is there any, it looks like somebody has his hand raised.
Oh, go ahead, Kevin.
No, that was me. I hit 9 instead of 6.
All right. So yeah, Rebecca motioned it. I seconded. We had a little discussion. Any other further questions? No, it doesn't look like it. All right, let's vote. All in favor of the motion of replacing the HVAC units for roughly $21,000, say aye.
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 Aye. Are there any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. Thank you so much for that hard work, Rebecca.
Sure.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Sure. The next item, this is more of a discussion. I don't think that it's something that we need to make a decision on. It's just something that has come up as we were working through the cleanup and the chart of accounts with BAS. So I had mentioned last week in the board meeting that we, the more I look at the way we have the reserves structured today, the more I think it provides some risk that we may want to mitigate. So there are pros and cons to the different approaches of looking at the reserves and how we track them. So there's what you call the component method, and then there's a pooled method, and there are benefits to both and risks to both. So what we're doing today is probably more along, it's almost like a hybrid. It's really more of a hybrid approach where we are allocating, we have a number of, individual GL accounts essentially with, specifically for reserves. And I'm going to share my screen so that you can see here. So these are the accounts that we have today. So this is the Master, Sandpiper Crest, Sagewood, Paired Villas, and Westlake. Because so in the scenario that we just, spoke about, if we were to use painting as an example, like if we have $81,000 in change in reserves for painting, we have no plans to use painting this year. So in this situation with the HVAC, we didn't have the money somewhere else that we could use. It would allow us to pull from that, track what we've taken from it, and be able to replenish it using the method that I'm proposing. What's happening right now is, because we're kind of using a component method, but we're not really using a component method. And the benefits of using a component method is you make sure you put money away for a specific line item and you can't take it out for anything else. So it ensures that you have money for that item when it needs to be replaced. The risks with the component method is if it breaks early and you don't have enough money to cover it, you either have to cover it with operating funds, assuming you have it available, or you have to do a special assessment. So with the component method, it essentially creates more opportunity or more risks to have these sort of one-off special assessments to fund a specific amount for a reserve account that we don't yet have enough money in. With the pooled method, we can track it in a similar way where we are able to budget and expense and show if we borrowed money from a bucket type of thing, using cost centers rather than having specific GL accounts. But what it does is it allows us to have a little more flexibility. The benefits are that if something breaks early, like the HVACs that we weren't planning for, it's a bigger pool of money that we can pull from, but we have to track we still have to track. So if the objective is to have $600,000 at the end of a period, we still need to have $600,000 at the end of the period, but it gives us more time and flexibility in how we make that up. The risks of the component method, or excuse me, of the pooled method, is that, if we are not mindful of what we're pulling money for, and we're not tracking that appropriately, it can mean that when the time comes to replace something, if we've dipped into the well too many times, we may not have enough money. So what I've been trying to contemplate, and this came up when we were looking at the chart of accounts structure with BAS and a number of accounts that we have. So we wanted to simplify the chart of accounts and then use cost centers to track the actual expense. So what I'm proposing here is that we would have essentially 2 reserve accounts for each of the properties. So in no way, when I say the pooled method, it is in no way pulling money from the separate properties. It is, we will still have a reserve account for the master, for Sandpiper Crest, for Sagewood, for Westlake, and for Pierre Villas. So none of that, we'll still have separate bank accounts. We'll still have separate, property reserve allocations. So none of that gets commingled. That's going to remain the same.
Hey, Rebecca, can I pause
Yeah.
1 sec? So it would be what you're showing, sir. I'm on one screen today too. So you're stating what you're showing there. I'll just use column A for right now. We're going with where your proposal is to use that with, like, for say general and then sub pools within the general. Is that what I'm getting?
That is absolutely correct. So
Okay.
I'm proposing that we would use these as what, cost centers. So if you think about it, I think a few of us were talking after the meeting. I don't remember who all was there, but thinking about it in terms of like a company, right? You have a cost center for IT, you have a cost center for HR, you have a cost center for public affairs and operations and, procurement, whatever. So whatever departments you would need, they would have their own sort of budget, and they would have all of their expenses that you want to be able to track and understand how much you are spending and be able to assess those things over time. It's the same concept that I'm proposing that we use here. but keeping all of the reserve money in a general reserve account, but using the cost centers to track the individual elements. So it still gives us the level of transparency we need. It actually provides a much better way for us to track, if we're sitting in these meetings and, we have an expense and we're like, oh, well, we have this extra money for this and that extra money for that. We can take a piece from here and there. In 6 months, we all have to remember that we said that. The numbers, we may not, remember those details when we're looking at, the next expense that has, to be covered. So this gives us a much more, concrete, black and white, historical tracking of all of those decisions where we can actually say, we're going to pull, I mean, P-U-L-L, not pool, but we're going to pull money from, the pool reserves and use it for the lake house because of whatever we plan for next year broke, and we have money this year that we don't need to spend, and we can actually track it. Where what we have today, it's in our minutes, right? It's nowhere in the accounting system at all. And so this is what I wanted to at least bring to the team, bring to the board, open for discussion. I don't think we have to make a decision on this tonight. And the existing reserve study that was done at the beginning of 2022, it does say clearly in that reserve study that we were using the component method. In the bylaws, it's silent. It doesn't say we're one or the other. It does not give us an indication. But I think, Patty, I'm relying on you to keep us honest in what was previously decided. So I'll open it up for discussion, and just I want to highlight though what you can see. This is what I'm proposing, and then we would be able to track other individual cost elements. So if we had general grounds and reserves, we could actually put specific line items in there for the individual pieces that we need to plan for. So it's a lot more detailed, but it gives still under general, and it still gives us lots of flexibility, if that makes sense. And you can see, compared to what we have in the actual system today, based on the reserve study, it's more detailed. So we'll have the ability to track this in a more, in my opinion, at least a more effective way. So I'll pause and just get the reaction of the group.
Rebecca, do you have a copy of the reserve study you could put up? So this way.
Yes, I think I have it open here. Yeah. Is there a specific section you want to go to, Patty?
Just to show the board, because I'm not sure if I'm sure they haven't studied this the way I have. So the breakdown, so these are all the items that we have listed in there.
Hey, Patty, before we go any further, Jen, would you do me a favor and mute the 813 phone number, whoever that is? It's a bit distracting. Thank you. Patty, please continue.
Okay. So and I just wanted to make sure that I want to clarify this because it may make life a little bit easier. So if we have the reserve study done as it stands, I mean, it's still good for another year. I'm already out. I'm looking for other proposals for the new one. But at this point, Rebecca, you scroll down to page 5. My only concern is, depending on how the reserve study is used, whether we use the pooling method versus the component method.
Yeah.
Different amounts of money that is taken out monthly for each homeowner. So if you see on the second line, $14.26 per member per month in 2023, and which would total $212,000 in total funding. But if we do it in the pool method, it's $866 per member per month in 2023 for $129,000. So there's a huge difference. So if we're talking only about doing this in Appfolio and having still using the component method for the reserve study, but keeping the money separated in Appfolio under cost centers, that's totally two different things. And I think that's where Rebecca and I have been going back and forth, because I've been pushing to stay with the component method, and Rebecca's been pushing for going with the cost centers. The cost centers, and Rebecca, tell me, explain if I'm wrong, but cost centers are more so for the portfolio use, not for the reserve study use.
Correct. So in my mind, there would be no change in what we have, what is listed in the reserve study or what we have been working towards for the last couple of years since the reserve study is done. And we would be able to, fund that, and Patty, I know that the reserve projections show 866 per member per month, but does that mean that we should only charge that, or should we charge 1426? And then if we have surplus,
See,
because we are pretty lowly funded right now.
we are,
you know,
we're poorly funded right now, absolutely.
Yeah, so, I don't think it is a bad idea for us to, to charge the higher amount, even if hired to, if it's going to help us to become, well-funded, essentially, which is that, sweet spot that we need to target.
Right, well, if you scroll down in, down further to the years where it's, like in 2024 and 2025, because I know 2024, that amount was taken and put into the budget.
Yes, correct.
So,
And I am not proposing that we change anything about what we have planned or approved for the 2024 budget. I'm not suggesting that we change the money that we've allocated for any of these items. I'm not saying, and I'm not suggesting that we should, charge a different amount. My only recommendation here is that we track it in a way that gives us more detail, and it helps us to better report on where we've had to use money we didn't plan for or use it before we had planned. And then on the flip side of that, where we have money that we had planned to use, but we didn't really need yet. Because I do think that there is, it's very difficult right now to figure that out. Like it took a long time for me to go through when I actually had to search for transactions and expenses to see what was actually charged for some of these items that were planned the last couple of years. So this would give us a much, if we had everything in one cost center, we would be able to very clearly see this is what we have, this is what we spent, this is what's available. And it allows us to track it in a much more effective way. And if we need to pull money from one account to the other, we can see very clearly, if we take $20,000 from one thing and move it to another to pay for something before we expect to, there's a transaction that shows that movement very clearly. And then we can, replenish that through the next year's budget or whatever, however we decide to do it, given the line item. But I just think it gives us better reporting, and it gives us more flexibility in the way that we're, having to expense things as well. So that's my what I've found. The more I look at this, the more I feel like this is going to give us a better way to understand what we've done. And year over year, this treasurer role is, it's a volunteer role, and it's something that is going to probably change every couple of years at a minimum. So I do think from a tracking perspective, it's really important to have details on what the decisions were prior to, whomever coming on board, because I can tell you, being in the seat, it's really hard to figure it out.
Rebecca, I have a question.
Sure.
So regardless of whether we do component or pooled method, does that change the number of actual bank accounts that we have?
No, it does not.
Okay.
All the bank accounts will still have an operating account for all of the properties. We will still have a reserve account for all of the properties. All of the money that's in there will remain in those individual accounts. None of that changes. Nothing changes there.
Gotcha. Thank you.
May I ask a question, Rebecca?
Sure. I know you
Matthew.
had some concerns about this, so I'm interested to hear your thoughts and reactions.
Yeah, my concern is what you just addressed, right? That we have boards that change over time. And so how do you maintain consistencies? Do your company example, which is a great one, tends to have a little bit more consistency. So that's a concern, but that's a concern with anything we do. So I like your idea of creating flexibility. Can I propose a hybrid just to think about, which is you do pools by cost center, functional areas, right? And so you've listed those down as, you could easily call them functional areas, not just cost centers, right? These are pooled by function and related. And we still collect the same amount of money, and I agree 100%. And I don't even understand why you would put less money per house for a pooled account versus a component account. Makes no sense to me, because you need the same amount of money in 10 years as you do otherwise. But that being said, so I agree. We don't reduce it because we're grossly underfunded. I don't know the amount anymore, so that would be nice to know. But then I would suggest, if we then send the money, pool the money by those different functional areas, right? And then once the money is in those areas, then it's protected. So if you have something in the general grounds or the pool reserves that needs to be done that wasn't planned, and you have money in the pool reserves, that's great. If not, you have to look elsewhere. And so you're actually prevent pulling too much from any one of those functional areas. And that's what I like about the component. It does protect those areas, and you can't, really borrow, and steal from some other area. And then all of a sudden it just creates this terrible cycle. It does force a certain amount of discipline, or, hey, you got to either pull out of ops, or, hey, by the way, you have to have a special assessment. So that's my counter proposal, right? Which is components funding, but so it's pooled by components or functional areas, because when on your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 major areas, I think 4 of them are probably the major areas. The pool worries me, the lake house, the building worries me, the fitness center with the building and then the roofing's reserves. A lot of the other ones I feel that, we can handle as long as we keep money in those accounts. And if we have to fix it, we can find money out elsewhere. But those 4 major ones that I put in the fitness center, I have a question mark. We really have to protect those, because the roofs are not going to last, as long as we think they're going to last here. So it's coming upon us that we're going to have to start replacing these roofs, just like replacing the AC. So does that make sense, what I'm suggesting?
Yeah, and I think we're saying the same thing, Mac. If I'm interpreting what you're saying correctly, let me share again.
But let me clarify, if I may. So let's use an example. Let's say we have $100 in the general grounds, and we have $500 in the pooled reserves, and the pool all of a sudden has a $650 expense. You're going to have to find that $50. You're going to pull it from one of the other functional areas, correct?
That's right.
I would argue
right.
you can't do. I argue you can't do that. So if the pools have 500 and we have a $650 expense, we have to find that out of either ops money, or we say, sorry, we have to go for a small special assessment to handle the pool because it failed prior to its due date being replaced. I don't like special assessments. I'd rather find it out of cut back something else. But you don't borrow outside of that functional area. So if you have expense that's $400 in the pool, and we were expecting to do the concrete replacement, but no, we have to redo all of the equipment. Oh, well, we're borrowing from the concrete to pay for the equipment inside that major area. That's how I see we protect it.
Are you stating to lock a certain amount of those and then versus the other? Is that what I got, Mac?
Well, I think once it goes into those, whatever agreed number of pooled areas, functional areas, it gets locked in those areas. So you can borrow within the areas, but not pull between areas. And that protects running something down. So all of a sudden you have all the 6 roofs you need replacement, and we don't have the money because we've been borrowing out of it to fix the air conditioners and the pools. That's the whole point of a component. It does protect it, but maybe we don't need it as detailed as maybe the general component one is, just by a functional area. I've been thinking about it, And that's just my recommendation, and I'll withdraw it if it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, Mac, maybe I can clarify because, so this is what we have today. These are the components, if you will. This is what we have for each of the properties. And you can see what I'm proposing here is more detailed. But we would have, these would be cost centers under a general reserve. So it would allow us to track and budget and, collect and allocate money for those areas without, and if we did borrow today, we do not have this capability the way it's structured today. If we did borrow money, we can track that to say, oh, we had to take, this one came a year early, so this one's not for 3 more years, so we're going to take $10,000 out of that, and then next year or later that year, we can move the $10,000 back when it's funded. So we can actually track how much we're pulling out and make sure that we're putting that back. Today, we really can't track that.
Right. I get it, but right now, if we have money in roofing, we can't use it for painting, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Right.
Correct.
So, but if we pull everything out of roofing to fix painting and pools, roofing can be zero. And I'm not saying this board would do it, but another board might, right? And so I'm saying maybe we need to have pools. Maybe I have too many areas. Maybe it's 2 areas or 3 areas. Like it's a pool for facilities and a pool for grounds and a pool, maybe only 3 pools that you can put. Then you can move within the subcategories within those pools instead of 8. And that gives you more flexibility, but it still creates some protection in the broad categories. That's what I'm trying to say is I think we need to build, it forces discipline, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying this board, but I think another board might very well say, I don't care, run the pool and the roofing down, because if we need to fix all these things, and then if we need it, we'll do a special assessment, and everybody wants the pool, so they'll pay for it. I'm making examples, but so maybe it's 2 or 3 pooled areas, functional areas that get the pooled money, and then they become sub pools or functional area pools. And then we have the ability to do it. It creates more flexibility, but not complete flexibility.
Yeah, and I think that's what I was suggesting here, that we would have cost centers to make sure that we were, responsible and we were tracking. But if we ever came into a situation, it allows us so that we don't have a special assessment in January and a special assessment in October and a special assessment the next March, because things break before we plan for them to, and we just don't have the money. I do think that there's a the other argument, more selfishly from a treasurer perspective, is it does not, like, if we do have money that we're taking from, just as an example. So if we have money that we're allocating for sidewalks and well pumps and those types of things, that is nowhere to be found at Folio today. What I'm suggesting is using the cost centers to make sure that we can put those components in and we can actually track amounts, and we can understand, okay, we've already put X amount of dollars in for sidewalks. It's not really ready until, whatever, we don't need it yet. The sidewalks are fine. So it gives us a better way to, just make that judgment. And I like your suggestion. If we are to keep the component method, I do agree simplifying it is going to be a better option, because it just provides more flexibility, but it still lacks our ability to track what we've spent it on and where we had planned to spend it, if that makes sense. Like what we're doing today, it does not give us that level of detail.
Okay, I don't have an idea of how to, I'm surprised we can't track if we move something from one account to another. I guess we can't move it, so we're not tracking where we're coming up with the money, right? Well, I believe in creating some kind of forced discipline for the board, just because it's just too easy to take the easy way out and not fund the reserves. So I'm just really sensitive to not having those reserves, because I think we're going to run short sooner rather than later, frankly. and that's it. I'll be quiet.
Noted, Mac, and I appreciate the need and the desire to maintain that level of discipline. That is absolutely something that we should be fiscally responsible in whatever we do. So it's more of an accounting method here that we're deciding on. So any other comments? Jen, I think your hand is up. Oh, I didn't.
That's okay. Whoever had their hands up, go ahead. I'm used to just chiming in, so go ahead. Jen, Kevin?
Maybe it looks like they're maybe both on a cell phone, so maybe they pushed a button they didn't intend to.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear
Can you
you.
hear me? Oh, okay. It's Kevin. I understand Mac's concerns and I agree with them. You know, we want to make sure that whatever decision we make, that the future is protected from robbing Peter to pay Paul and leaving everybody in a lurch, because that's never any fun. And I think it would be not within our fiduciary responsibility to do that. And I understand needing the flexibility that Rebecca is talking about too. So I like the hybrid approach to that.
Go ahead, John. Any other thoughts?
No, I maybe I can sync up with you later, because I just wanted to get a couple comments on, or get a couple bits of information on what you were talking about from the risk perspective for both different components or different categories of a component versus a pooled. I didn't
Sure.
catch all that.
John,
Unless you have it on.
I have the
unless you have-
same questions, John. So if you have those questions, ask them so that we can all be informed.
Well, I just wanted to be clear on risk versus, you know, what we're proposing. So a lot was said. I'm not a stenotypist, but I just want to see what the risk for the component is versus a risk versus the pooled.
Yeah. So
In summary, you know.
yeah. So I mean, just in a nutshell, the risks for the component method may require us to have more frequent special assessments to members if something breaks and we do not have enough to cover the funding for it. It does not allow us to pull from one bucket or another. It requires us to go and ask, you know, for a one-time payment for all of the members in order to fund the difference that we don't have funding available for.
Yep.
For the pooled method, the risks are if we dip into the bucket and into different buckets too often and we're borrowing from Peter to pay Paul type of approach, then when something does break that we had planned for and funded, but we borrowed from that bucket,
We'll have insufficient funds.
We may not have enough money to pay for it. So there is a required discipline in making sure that we're not doing that willy-nilly, right? And that we're tracking what we are, you know, if we have to take money, we should try to avoid that in any, you know, at all costs. But if we have to pay for something and avoid a special assessment because it broke a year early, but we have plenty of funding available, it gives us the ability to pay for it without a special assessment. And then we have to, you know, manage our responsibilities and making sure that in the end, if we have, you know, $100,000 required to be funded this year, we still will have $100,000 funded this year. We're not going to change the amount that we're contributing, but then we may have to look at the amounts for the following year to determine if we need to increase that for an unexpected expense, or if we're continuing to fund something that we borrowed early from another account for, we need to make sure that we're allocating that back, if that makes sense.
Yep. Okay. Got it.
So that I know this is just, I wanted to at least share this with you all to give you something to think about and get your questions, you know, give you some opportunities. I don't think this is something we have to do right away. It just provides some level of visibility and reporting. I think that gives us a better way to manage that, especially year over year as we get new treasurers in this seat. It's easier to see the history and the decisions. from an accounting perspective. So we can make this decision later. I don't think it necessarily needs to be done in 2024. We can, talk about it and figure out if we want to do it in 2025 or as part of the next reserve study, which I imagine we probably want to do next year because it'll be our 3rd year. And there's been a substantial amount of inflation the last couple of years. So to make sure that we're, appropriately funding. So I don't know if there's any other items. Go ahead.
Yeah. Before we get off, I have a quick question.
Sure.
So I'm looking at the reserve study from last year, which I recommend everybody on the board go and read this thing through start to finish. One, I think an important point is that our projected expenses every year, whether we do pooled or component, every year, our expenses still remain the same. We still have to spend the same amount of money every year. It's not like one method's cheaper than another method. Is that correct, Rebecca?
That's exactly right. Yeah, it doesn't change what we're funding.
And then the reserve study, and this is what you guys were talking about a little bit earlier, the reserve study does say the association currently uses the component method.
Mhm.
Based on my experience, and then I also checked with some previous board members, do you think that that's true? Because I think that that's not true.
So the way I understand, I think what we're doing is kind of a hybrid. I don't think it's like a true component method where we have these individual line items that we're budgeting and we're allocating certain dollars, which is sort of, as I understand it, that's component method in its truest form, right? So we're accruing things in kind of buckets, and then we're protecting those buckets. So it's a bit of a hybrid. So we're funding, we're allocating reserve funding from our operating funds every month to pay for the expenses, the reserve expenses that we've defined, but we're not allocating it out by the individual, line items. And I know, Patty has some concerns about making sure that there's a level of transparency and visibility because she gets questions from homeowners that she needs to say, where's our money? What is our money being spent on? So this, what we have today in these accounts, as an example, we can, that's where we're pulling money. So we're sort of segregating it between these, 6 accounts for the master, as an example. So they're kind of broad buckets, if you will, but they're not the individual, little line items.
So essentially your proposal differs from what we're doing now in that you just refine a little bit more what we're actually currently doing, but we're still going to do the process will still be the same. You're just giving it more definition.
Yes, for all intents and purposes, it is essentially, it's treating it as hybrid, but it simplifies our GL account structure. And then we use the cost centers to allocate it. And if it's helpful, I don't know if it means anything to the group, but we're basically doing the same thing with our events. So we have our events that happen throughout the year. We have the Easter egg roll this weekend. We have the story time with Santa. We have cost centers that track the expenses for each of those and the planned expenses for each of those. So it's essentially trying to treat it in a similar fashion where I know that those are social, those are social events and they're not liabilities that we have to care for. But the concept it is essentially the same, where we have, we plan for so much money for events during the year, and then we have these individual elements of those events that we're, allocating funds for. We know that they're going to cost, they may be a little bit more, a little bit less, but we're at least budgeting for them appropriately and expensing them so that we can see what we've spent on each of those items.
Tracking. So the items that you have highlighted right now, those would be the cost centers. So like Lake House reserves, for example, we'll take that one.
Yeah.
All of the items that are under the reserve study that have to do with the lake house, those would get grouped together and put in Lake House reserve.
That's what I'm proposing. So this is sort of a breakdown. If you look, like these are all of the things that are, I would consider under the lake house, whatever.
Or itemized.
We would be able to agree. I think the board can make a call on how they want to group those items. I put this here for reaction and just, for illustration purposes. But these are there's no detail, like this. And in the reserve study, if I go back to the reserve study, it's on page 22. So you can see here, there's a lot of extra detail. We still can break it down to that level, but I just don't think it's necessary if we have these, cost center structures. I think the reserve study should still have those individual components for sure. But the way that, how we're labeling them in the system, we have some flexibility with. But these are the types of things that we would want to group under Lake House, just as an example, if that helps, Mark.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I kind of would like to see that. I like your method. I'd like to see it to the granularity of the reserve study. I know that you said that that would create dozens and dozens of GL items. Would that increase the workload on the HOA secretary to manage, or would it increase the workload on BAS to manage, or would it just make it more difficult to review?
So from a reporting perspective, having more GLs doesn't make it more or less administrative. We would, but it does make it a little more challenging when we actually have expenses allocating to those items and what they're for. So this way it would give us a little more flexibility. And I wish I had an example that I could show you, but essentially we would be able to charge it to the GL account, which would be, reserves, general reserves as an example. And then we would be able to charge it to the cost center for pool reserves as an example. And then there's a description where we can put, it was, the pool surfacing, or, whatever the line item is, whatever we're item. And then we can list in that sort of comments exactly what was on the reserve study. So we know we spent that and we can report on that. Today, we can't really do that very easily. It's more, you got to hunt and peck to find it, in other words, unless there's another way that I haven't found yet in that folio. So, this is something to mull on. I don't think that we have to make a decision. I do think it's something to consider and think about, and making sure that we, Mac, to your point, we need to make sure that we provide, systemic protections for the HOA over time. And I don't think this is eliminating that protection, but it does give us better visibility and a little more flexibility should we absolutely need it, so that, if the time comes, we don't have to do a special assessment or, a whole bunch of more frequently. I guess it just helps to keep things on a more even cash flow basis.
Can I jump in, Rebecca? First of all, making the accounting better is great. So, but I was curious when, so we can mull on this, but when do you think would be an appropriate time to start making a transition? Is there a particular time in the year so that we can at least start putting it on the wall to say we need to make a decision, and we could set some workshops up before that? So I'm just trying to get that sense.
I think a natural cutover would be maybe the first of the year. So looking at maybe doing this for 2025 as we're going through budgeting, so that we can do appropriate mapping. I mean, technically we could do this at any time, but it may be a little wonky, when people are trying to tie back this year's budget to, where the money is going, type of thing. So if we're looking at maybe doing this for 2025, we can at least, present the information the way it's going to look in the system to the membership, and make sure that there's clarity and detail, enough detail provided around that.
So we start looking at that budget. What is it, August, September timeframe, I think. So we should come up with a plan before that, and then be prepared. So when we move into the budget process, we have it done. That track. Okay. That's
correct. And I also think, just given the reserve study was done in 2020, or I think it was early 2021, if I remember correctly. No,
22, I think. Yeah.
So I think it's typical, and Patty, you can correct me if I'm misspeaking here, but I think it's generally every 3 to 5 years But given the amount of inflation that we've had in the last couple of years, you know, if you look at the reserve study, it was planning a 2.5% inflation rate over the course of the study. And I just think that puts us a little bit at risk, given the fact that we're so underfunded, you know, because we're new, we're taking over, we need to build that reserve account up. So I do think it would be worthwhile. And I think if we do, redo the reserve study in 2025 and we plan for that, it gives us a lot of opportunity to, make sure these things are completely aligned the way that we want to structure the system as well.
I agree 100%. One last question, if I may. So I know we're grossly underfunded or badly underfunded. Do you know what the percentage is where we fall in? There's 0 to 30 is, terribly underfunded, and they have a spec. I saw it on it when it scrolled by. Where do we fall into that range? Do we know?
I haven't done the calculation on that, Mac, but for the next board meeting, I can bring that or I can maybe work on that and share it out with the board via email.
I don't want to put more work on you. It was just, I didn't know if you knew the number. I didn't know if we knew the number.
I don't know it offhand. Yeah.
Okay. No worries at all. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah. Hey, Mac, in 2022, we were at 27%. I don't know what we're at now, 2 years later.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. For the reserve study definitely said we were in the 27% range, but I don't know what it is right now. I haven't calculated that at this point.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much, Rebecca. And I hope I didn't come across difficult, because this is a great idea.
No. And I expected, I know that there's some attachment to the component method, and I'm open to feedback because I'm new at this, right? So, I want to make sure that we're talking through all the angles and making sure we're thinking about this in the right way. So.
No, but I mean, from my perspective, I think, there's some pieces when it comes to an HOA board that there is room for some change. Not everything needs to stay the same, but I mean, finance and accounting itself is a whole nother kettle of worms versus what we allow, like a fenced color or something like that. This is more important in my opinion.
Great. Well, I think that's it for me. Sorry to kind of, take so much time. I think we were expecting this to be a short meeting, so my apologies for that.
No, that's great work, Rebecca. Thank you so much. I think everybody's probably more informed now than an hour ago. So fantastic. So no vote on that, just a good discussion. We can open it up to resident comments if we have any. I think there's 2 or 3 residents on right now, if they have anything to say.
Hi, hi. This is Nick. I'm working on the finance committee with Rebecca, and a couple of comments on the reserve under the pooling method. I've dealt with these at a couple different HOAs, and both times we've used pooling methods. I mean, I think a couple of things I'd just like to share is that the approval process for any expenditure is always the same. It requires board approval. You can't have a runaway board just spending money. It requires the same level of approvals. We're talking maybe a half a dozen projects a year when you look at the study. So it's not like we're trying to manage 30, 40 concurrent projects. So it's very manageable. Tracking the actuals, like Rebecca's talking about, by category, I do think is very important, because when the studies are refreshed, you have those actuals that you spent that are used to reestablish a baseline for them. The reserve study, based on its current projection, to the one person you mentioned about roofing and stuff like that, based on the pooling method with inflation, it's in the reserve study. Over the next 10 years, by the time we get to 2033, we will have $900,000 in the reserve, because the reserve funding is anticipating the replacement of those roofs and other long-term projects that are outside the current window. So the money, as long as we stay with the funding method and we fund to it, I think, the funding level, the money will be there, when it's needed. And lastly, you might just want to talk to the company that provided the reserve, who did the reserve study, just to get their feedback on the pooling method and how they would see it operate, or how they've seen it operate at different HOAs. So you have that feedback from them in the sense of the pros and cons of how they worked. Thank you for my time to be able to speak with you.
Thank you for your comments. And if anybody wants a little more clarity on what Nick was talking about for expenses by year, on page 68 of the reserve study outlines what we're expected to have to pay for every year by year, and it gives you a total. So for example, this year, I think there's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's 11 projects this year that we're supposed to pay for a total of 218,000. So you can look at that and get that level of clarity. Thanks for pointing that out, Nick.
Okay.
Any other resident comments? I don't think we have any other residents on the line. Okay, great. Any other closing board member comments before we adjourn?
Hey, Mark, so the motion is to park it for now.
I mean, there's no real motion. This was just really a board discussion and education. So there's
Okay.
no decision or not decision to be made. It's just good. If Rebecca educated board on component and pooling methods.
In a very long-winded way, right?
Right. All right. If nobody else says anything, then I will motion to adjourn.
Seconded.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody?
Thank you,
opposed?
Rebecca. Thank you, Rebecca.
You're
right.
welcome.
Thank you
Thanks,
very much.
everyone. Have a good evening.
Have a great night, everybody.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.